grass will survive. But a full year.
Comment on that, Mark.
Okay, let's hear it.
No black plastic. They have agricultural tarp that, it resists the UV breakdown. If you put down just regular black plastic, you'll have pieces of it everywhere. And this is also true of most of your commercial tarps that are woven together. They break down with time, and you can see it on the tarps out here that are covering up my stone, the gravel that we use in the winter. They don't last, and then you get little shreds of it everywhere. And I don't like that.
That's a really good point, yeah.
I think thistle likes to survive.
Oh, yeah.
I found it doesn't kill thistle.
We've
Even a
done
full
it-
year?
We've done it.
Yeah.
We've
Wow.
done it
2 years.
We've done it 3 is 3.
3 years.
3 years. And,
Yeah.
and it comes back. It does slow it down a little
It
bit.
floats down.
Wow, that's
It
amazing.
likes the darkness.
Just kinda hibernates. Wow. Yeah, that's amazing.
But
I'm
everything
not
else is
impressed.
Same thing with the bindweed.
Bindweed will hang out, yeah.
Nothing gets it.
Yeah. Rep?
First of all, a question about timings, a half a year or full year. Do you mean like, when you say a full year, like, is that 2 summers, or is that just like a legit, like a year? Is it not,
For me, like if I'm starting a new garden area, and actually my tarps are like UV treated now that I think about it, the ones I use, and so that was a really good point. Right now, I would tarp an area, come back a full year later, this time of year, pull it off, and I'm going, you know, garden.
a full growing season?
Full growing season, yeah.
We have areas that we're gonna be putting tarp on next week, that, we've just been waiting for the snow to be gone. And we'll leave it on until we're ready to plant, and it will slow down, most of the weeds.
Oh, for even this year's?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of puts the pause button on anything germinating and getting going, and then if it's hot enough, it'll start to kill some seed, some of the weed seed in there, and yep. So tarping, there's considerations, right? When we're designing like, you know, am I going to use tarps? What kind of tarps, right? All these things, it's all part of the design, but it can be a nice strategy.
He talked about layering. Oftentimes what we'll do is, we'll just put down a layer of straw and then a layer of wood chips. And without the tarp. And it slows stuff down, and it also creates this whole microbial, mycorrhizal, fungal
Oh yeah,
exchange as things break down.
totally.
Now, straw and hay are different. Do you use straw because it has more nutrients?
I use straw because hay is a really pain in the neck. It has no weeds in it.
Yeah, and hay also has less nutrients, correct?
No, hay has more
Hay
nutrients.
has more nutrients.
Yeah,
Straw
hay-
has.
The upstraw has less,
Okay.
because hay is most hay is gonna be green on the inside of the bale.
Right.
The outside's brown, right, from sun, but you break it open and it's green inside, so it's got more nitrogen.
That's what he's usually livestock.
Yeah, more
Okay.
fertility, and so I use both.
Okay.
Depending, you know, if I see certain weeds and some hay, I'm gonna be really selective about where I use it. But also, you know, the way we do a lot of our garden areas is they're always mulched, right? I rarely have bare soil exposed to the sun, and so if you always have a layer of mulch, you know, on top of your garden soil, it's not going to create the conditions for weed seeds to germinate, right? But as soon as you take that few inches of mulch away, now every seed is going to germinate, right? So if I'm in a garden area where I know I'm always mulching, I'll use hay, even though I know there's a bunch of weed seed in there and whatnot, and usually I find it's not too much of a problem. But this is all part of, you know, design, where if I'm going to grow carrots somewhere and I put hay mulch down, then I have to move the hay mulch to plant the carrots, you know, that could be a problem because all those the seed from the hay is left there, and it's going to germinate, because for carrots, you know, I like to get the soil get the mulch off and have clean soil. And so one thing I will say about mulch, singing its praises here, but it does keep the soil from warming up in the spring, right? So a lot of people will pull mulch off their garden this time of year, so the sun will hit it, start warming that soil up. Okay, that's also one of the advantages of raised beds, which you see all around Spirit Works here, a lot of raised beds, and living in the north, like we need our soil to warm up in the spring to get growing, and that's a real nice advantage of raised beds. They'll warm up faster. So getting back to the soil prep here, tillage, just some quick points on tilling is, I'm sure most people are familiar that, tilling, it knocks back your soil life, right? It disrupts the soil food web. You can just picture an earthworm down there, ouch, right? And that doesn't mean, I still think it's a really useful technology and appropriate technology. And a lot of times when I'm starting gardens, like this time of year, if someone wants to put a garden in, we'll bring in a tiller and give it a nice tillage, cover it with mulch, and then, never till again. But it's just that initial soil prep that can be really helpful. And I think where people get into trouble is, where they're, farms obviously are notorious for this, just repeated tillage, like for weed control and things like that. Where I think it's an appropriate technology, when designed and used properly, but overused, it's very degrading to the soil.
It also creates a dead pan. The depth of the tiller creates a barrier that keeps water from sinking any deeper, but it also keeps it is a barrier to the exchange between the deeper subsoils and the soil that you're actually growing in, so that the microbes can access the nutrients that are in the deeper soil. You want to be able to do that, and it causes the soil to dry out quicker or to swamp if there's a deluge of rain.
And I've seen that on some old alfalfa fields where, alfalfa, they usually like every 5 years or so, they till and replant. And it was like a foot and a half down, it's like a parking lot, just pavement. It's like, what the heck? It's really incredible what, repeated tillage can do. And then compost. So just a couple notes on compost. A lot of, if you want to be a garden teacher yourself, you can do it. Just tell everyone 1 to 2 inches of compost on top of the soil. And you're an expert garden teacher. Because it really is kind of like the key, and can kind of be that simple. Okay, this class that I sat in on from this big organic commercial grower, that's all he did. He just an inch or two of compost on top of his beds every year, and everything grew great. And so it really can be that simple, but not all compost is created equal too. So that's important. Compost, it can't really be sold in a bag. Okay, you can't really go to a garden center and buy a bag of compost, of good compost. Okay, so compost, it needs a heap, right? Because compost is alive. It's full of living microbes and just life. And when you put it into a bag, it's just that life is gonna start to die off, right? It needs the heap. When you build a compost heap, I think the minimum is like 4 feet by 4 feet. So quality matters, and when we're building our compost, the more diversity of ingredients you can get into that compost, the better, right?
I have a question. So I listened to this thing on NPR, some famous plant guy in Louisiana, and he said that he puts everything in compost, except glass and plastic, and he said that the previous day he put a dead raccoon in it. And I feel like, what's your opinion on animals and stuff, or meat and things like that, or bones in compost? Because it seems like it's kind of controversial of whether or not it's dangerous.
Wishbones are great.
Oh yeah, that's a
Yeah.
classic one, right?
Yeah.
So my question would be, if you're gonna put dead chickens or whatever it is, whatever animal into the compost, my question is, what has that animal been eating? You know,
Yeah.
because a question I'll get, what about dog poop in the compost? Man, well, no way. What has that dog been eating? Has he been eating kibbles and bits, or has he been eating, fresh, super high quality meat? And right? So, because absolutely, animal carcasses. I mean, a lot of composting operations actually, one of their main nitrogen ingredients is animal carcasses.
Yeah, and it's really great.
And I don't know about those operations. I don't buy compost from them, because I don't know where those carcasses came from. I don't know what those animals were eating. But if it's done properly, theoretically it can be clean, good compost if the animals were fed well and healthy, not diseased. So it can be done well. I would say if that answers your question. But,
Does it have to be hot with the animal, like when you're using like dead animals, is that like when a hot compost is necessary, or is it not matter?
yeah, I would say so, and I would.
Or cold, because it gets cold enough here that most of the bacteria in soil will like die over the winter.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, freeze out harmful pathogens potentially.
So the standards for, that they give us for the state is that if you're gonna apply compost, you have to wait at least 120 days before you harvest anything from a bed that you have put compost on,
Interesting.
to make sure that the environment or whatever addresses any potential bacterial content. The one thing about that rule, if in order for a farm the size I have to put an inch or two of compost, I have to be a millionaire. Or have a lot of real estate that is in compost production.
There are other ways to inoculate your beds though, like with teas.
Dirt Rich is a company that picks up compost and they sell it. So if anyone needs compost,
Good stuff.
yeah, it's good.
Yeah, I've heard it's.
So,
But I don't think compost kills hookworms or like parasitic worms. So that's one thing to think about if you're putting animals in there.
I think my next slide's about compost. Diverse ingredients we talked about, to turn or not to turn. So that's kind of getting to what you're saying, Micaiah. Like, when you turn a pile of compost, right, it heats up. And that heat can, any potentially harmful bacteria pathogens, are rendered safe during that heating process. And, there a lot of people, they never turn their compost, they just pile it up and just do what is considered a slow and cold compost, right? Or just slowly breaks down. And, I don't have the answer to your question. My instinct on it is, after several years, anything that was harmful in there has been neutralized as it all broke down in the soil, and you don't necessarily need that hot composting action. But if you're trying to apply that compost, sooner than later, within a year or two, then that hot composting action is probably important. And bins and heaps. So I think it's about 4 feet by 4 feet, right? You need, for compost to come alive, it needs some area. You can't have a small pile. And so I've made compost heaps I've built them with, gotten lumber from the mill and built, big bins. I've used wire fencing, 4-foot wire fencing, and made, big hoops. And really what I go to most lately though is just pellets, just 4 pellets, and I find that just to be easy, really. And it keeps it contained and easy to, I just use screws and take it apart, put it together, take it apart, really simple, easy to get pellets. I don't know, anyone else have any good compost bins or ideas like that?
We've done workshops, a lot of different kinds of workshops here, specifically on compost. And there's something that's worth researching called Johnson-Su composting. And what you do is you take perforated pipes. You first of all, you take a pallet and you put 4-inch holes in the pallet. And then you take these perforated pipes and you stick them into the holes. And then you build your wire mesh or palleted container around it. And you fill things up. And then you don't have to worry about turning it because you're getting the airflow that's necessary for the compost, the decomposition and raising the heat and that sort of thing. Box of Rain sells compost thermometers that look like a meat thermometer that are this long that you can stick into your pile to see if it's getting up to temperature. I have to let my compost sit a couple of years because I don't monitor the temperature of it. And the regulatory process that I'm under requires that it either be several years or I have to get the compost up to that temperature and document it and be taking temperatures all the time. And that's just one more thing to do that I don't have time for. Jossie's comment about compost tea, from my point of view, is a much more economical and doable process for inoculating the soil and increasing the nutrient dense potential of the plants.
Making a little bit of compost go a lot farther.
Well, it's just, it just makes sense to me. And the other thing that we do is we did trenches between our beds, putting the soil up on the rows that we're planting, and fill those trenches with wood chips that decompose. And as they decompose, they're inoculating the beds with the mycorrhizae and the fungi that help get the soil from being more bacterial to be more fungal in its composition, which is more desirable for growing.
What is the compost tea made of?
It usually has things like humic acid, worm castings, fish meal. There are a whole bunch of different compositions that you can get. You can go to a company called Compost Tea out in California. They'll send you a kit. You analyze your soil, and they'll send you a good blend for the soil that you have. And the most dramatic thing about all of that is that as you enrich and feed the microbes in the soil, the plants are healthier and able to resist disease and pests. And so not only do you get nutrient-dense plants, but you get plants that are more resilient.
And basically, you think about making a cup of tea, you have a tea bag, and it's basically like a barrel of water in a big tea bag of some kind of compost.
Okay.
It's
And
aerated.
it's
You use it as like
You aerate the water as you're making the tea, so that it doesn't ferment and go sour.
Like a fish tank bubbler or something like that. And you aerate it, yeah.
There's one outside if you want to look at it.
And one other point on compost, like with our farm, we've really designed the animals to make the compost, and it's taken a lot of the labor out of us. And so, our chicken coop is designed. Chickens drop most of their manure at night, and so I designed it for easy clean out right under where they roost. But also what I do is I throw a little bit of grain down, where they're dropping all that manure, and then so what do they do when I throw grain on their manure?
Look at it.
Scratch and pat and scratch, and so they start turning it, right, and mixing it, goats have really produced some amazing compost. And so our goats, they have a pen, right, where they spend all winter and a lot of the year in this pen, and I'm constantly layering sawdust, wood chips, straw, even char from my burn piles that I don't let burn down all the way and go out. I put it out with a hose, and it leaves a bunch of char. Throw that in the goat pen. They stomp that, work that in, right? All that carbon. And then I just dig once or twice a year. I go in with a wheelbarrow and some tools and dig it up and pile it up. That top picture kind of looks like that. Just and pile it up, and that digging it and then piling it. That's the one turn it gets, and it heats up and it breaks down by the next spring into a beautiful compost. And the key is layering. A lot of people who keep animals, farms around here, you see, the lack of bedding is astounding, right? Not only is it healthier for animals to have lots of bedding, anytime you walk into a chicken coop or a goat pen or even a pig pen, it shouldn't stink. If it stinks, where it's there's not enough carbon, soaking all that up, there's not enough bedding. If it smells like pigs, well, yeah, it should smell like pigs, but it shouldn't stink, And so yeah, I see that a lot, just a lack of bedding. And that's the key to our goat compost and the chickens really, is getting, the organic sawdust, wood chips, hay, straw, getting that in for them to mix the manure. And yeah.
Is it true that, like, specifically goat and rabbit poop does not need to go through this higher temperature breaking down in the compost heap before being applied to a garden for health or safety reasons? I've heard that somewhere, that goat and rabbit poop can be immediately applied to a garden bed because it doesn't contain those harmful pathogens.
Yeah.
I'd be more concerned about the pH of the,
Okay, too high.
Yeah, it's always going to be better if it gets composted, right?
Exactly. Okay.
Gets aged compost, so it's only going to get better.
Gotcha.
But there are situations where you want to apply it directly, and I don't know the exact answer to that. I mean, I know chicken manure going right on the garden. You have to be really careful, right? Because chicken manure, right? Chickens don't pee. You guys know that? It's all in the poop. So that's why it's so hot, right? And so if you put chicken manure right on the garden, it can burn. Your plants will literally get burned where they uptake this really hot, nutrient, and it hurts them. Where horse manure, horses have a cold digestion. Horse manure can, I don't know as far as safety with like pathogens, but I know horse manure can go right on the garden, and it's not going to burn the plants like chicken manure. So I know there are nuances like that.
because it doesn't heat up and it doesn't burn, it carries a lot of seed.
Carries the weed seed, yeah.
So my understanding about the rabbits is that you can use it directly, but recommend it on your perennials if you're not gonna compost it.
Okay.
Because it won't burn like the chicken manure, but it can still have pathogens that can affect people.
Oh, okay.
So perennials are not gonna, you're not
Take it
taking
right away.
the tissue like a lettuce, right?
Okay,
Interesting.
thank you for that.
And there's also, there's a difference between taking some pretty fresh manure or whatever it is and applying it right, say you have whatever garden plant growing, tomato, whatever it is, and if you have bare soil grow around that plant and you put that fresh manure on the bare soil, there's a big difference between if you have a layer of mulch and you put the manure, spread it around there, right? You have this buffer that it's gonna slow the decomposition. The wood chip's gonna soak some of it up. It becomes a different thing when you have a little bit of mulch on your soil opposed to bare soil. So direct seed or transplant, this is an important part of garden design. Are we direct seeding or transplanting? And so let's start with, what are the pros and cons? So what are the benefits of direct seeding? What would be the pros of direct seeding?
No transplant shock.
No transplant shock. The roots never get disturbed, right? They sprout right there, they stay right there. Yeah, time to make starts, and yep, totally. Yeah, and then for transplanting, you know, we're talking about in a greenhouse, starting our seeds ahead of time, right? Growing them up in a greenhouse and transplanting them out. What would the benefits be of that? Start earlier, which is important in the north. Yeah, longer growing season. What else?
You know what's gonna come up. You're not wasting space out in the garden.
Totally. Yeah, that's a big one. You know, so our farm, you know, we kind of market garden as well. We bring vegetables to farmers market. So, you know, we really want to be efficient. Like if I seed, you know, a bed of something and we get like 70% germination, it's kind of like, dang, you know. And then you have to, what do I do with that other 30%? I don't want to leave it not growing. Where when I transplant, you know, I'm spacing everything out perfect, and I got the, you know. So efficiency-wise, transplanting can really help make efficient use of your garden space, of your growing space. And, you know, so this is just kind of an example of, you know, it's not that one is better than the other, and you know, we do both. We direct seed, carrots, radishes, lots of different, you know, different things, but then we transplant other things, and it's just kind of, that's part of our design, right? We're observing, we're learning, we're thinking about what am I going to transplant, start ahead of time, and what do I want to, you know, seed directly into the soil, right? That's a part of design.
There's also a piece that's just common sense. I had to chuckle when I heard about a Newtown farmer doing seed flats of beets and then transplanting them, because it just doesn't make sense.
We do beets.
You transplant
We
beets?
transplant beets.
But we used to not.
We used to not.
Was that?
We used to not, and we've actually we tried it out, and then we switched to it.
Interesting.
And it's mainly for that, you know, and we're probably going to be different than a lot of you in the room as far as, you know, we're growing beets for the market, right? And so yeah, we want full beds of beets. And you know, I learned this commercial grower is actually who I learned it from, and he was saying too, you save. It's not really an issue with us because we save seed, but he buys the seed, and you are much more efficient with your seed costs when you're starting in a greenhouse. You know, because you can just put one beet seed in each cell, where when you plant direct seed a bed, you have to use a lot more seed, and then you're thinning.
And like, if we harvest carrots and then we're gonna put beets in there next year or something, I don't know if that's sort of.
Yeah.
The beets are already 3 weeks ahead of the seeds we would be putting when we pull the carrots out, so it just like buys us a little more time. When
Yeah.
we're doing like multiple crops in one season.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Get things going, up and going before the space is needed in the garden. And then seed quality and adaptation. So we talked a little about seed quality already, and I'll just share, we've been breeding corn, field corn, dry corn, for making like, you know, cornbread or polenta and things like that. Sole is our favorite. And so 4 years ago we started 20 different varieties of corn. And we grew them all up in one patch, right? And let them just mingle, right? Cross-pollinate, right? So, and then the next year, you know, we got some pretty good years of corn, but it was nothing. The patch was very like, you know, some were early, some were late, some were this, some were that. But we went through and we picked out like the best, you know, 5 years, the best 10 years that all kind of ripened at the time we were looking for. And then the years go on, and now last year is like we're starting to get these beautiful patches of corn adapted to our site, you know, adapted to the harvest time we want. And corn is one that is very adaptable. Other plants, garden plants, can take a little longer or a little more work. Corn is very adaptable, but it's just an example. Like for me, it's just been astounding, like how well this corn is growing now from 4 years of selection. It's really amazing. And this is kind of getting popularized. Has anyone heard of landrace gardening? You've heard of it, right? It's a short book, almost like a pamphlet, but a short book. The term was coined by Joseph Lofthouse, a grower in Utah, I believe, and he put out this short book that is getting really popular, a lot of traction, and it's kind of all about what I just described, starting with a wide genetic base, tons of varieties of beets, let's say, and then growing them all up, letting them all cross-pollinate, and then selecting, for your site, for your region, for your climate, your soil, right? And so you're developing a land race that is adapted to your site. And so that's something we can do, talking about seed, how well seed performs, the sky is the limit, right? When we start with lots of diversity and then start selecting from there, it's really amazing. I've been amazed in my short farming career with that. Okay, weeding. So this is something we have to design for in our gardens, right? How are we gonna weed? Are we gonna be down on our hands and knees pulling weeds by hand mostly? Are we gonna be, coming in with, there's all kinds of tools. And a lot of market gardeners are really on the forefront of using some of these really neat hand tools and things. But it's part of our design, right? Like one tool that's really neat that market gardeners use is a wheel hoe. Has anyone have you ever seen a wheel hoe, Wendy? Do you guys have one?
Yeah, I do not have one now.
Yeah.
I have had.
And it's just kind of like this, it has one, maybe two wheels in the front and just kind of this handle, you just kind of push it. And it has this, there's different attachments, but like a stirrup, like a stirrup in the back that'll just kind of slice the soil. And you could go really fast with it, just like, and it can make weeding, go really quick. But what would you need in order to weed a garden with a wheel hoe?
Enough space between the plants.
Yep, space between the plants, and also like
Set row size.
set row size.
Yeah, like spacing according to the wheel.
Yeah.
Is that what you were saying?
Yep, exactly, and also like, you need pretty, not necessarily straight, like you could go along a curve with it, but you need, some kind of, like you're not gonna be able to like bend it back and forth, so, that would be part of your design. If I wanna, be able to push a wheel hoe through here, because I'm a market grower, and, I need to make really efficient use of my time, that I need to design for something I'll be able to push that along. And so on our farm, which isn't a big farm, by the way, I don't know what you guys are picturing, but I say our gardens are approaching a half acre of gardens, and then we have orchards and animals and stuff. But I've really fallen in love with the peasant hoe, which is just a really stout hoe. Okay, not like the ones you get at the stores. You probably have to order it online or find an antique type one around, which actually they are kicking around at yard sales and things. And what I really love about a peasant hoe, also called an eye hoe sometimes, is I now let weeds grow up in an area, and I can just go along with this peasant hoe, standing straight up. I'm not bending down, I don't have to get down into this. I can stand straight up and just go and just chop and drop those weeds. And so I'm using weeds to build fertility. Okay, I'm letting them get big, where before I used to try to get them out small, right? Because weeds come out easier when they're small. But now with the peasant hoe into my design, I can let weeds grow up, get bigger, and then, enjoy my work standing straight up, chopping them down with a hoe, building fertility. And, so that's been part of our design, is around this tool and whatnot. And, I still do we still do lots of hand weeding. Like, I don't want to paint any pictures, like you're going to get away from that. In between plants, right? You go in and you still get, but a lot of these tools can save a lot of time, and so it's an important part of design.
Is that what the Grim Reaper is usually holding? The peasant on?
No, that's a sign.
Yeah, sigh, okay.
And that's probably, those are probably my top two tools actually, the sigh and the peasant hoe. If I could only bring two
Okay.
tools with me to the desert island, it would probably be those.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, tropical island.
Yeah.
Island.
Yeah.
Wild Horse Island. So designing for weed management, we talked about that, you know, thinking about our tools, how we're gonna weed. Grass or no grass? Okay, this is a really interesting one for me, and I think maybe sometimes it's overlooked by, you know, home gardeners or whatever, and it's kind of, you know, for me, when I'm designing a garden, a farm, whatever it is, like, is this growing area? Is this grass? Am I allowing grass or am I not allowing grass? Okay. So in my gardens, what do you think? No grass allowed, right? That's the goal. And I'm not saying it's like that. You come to our farm, you'll find grass in the garden. But like the goal is to keep grass out, right? Because grass is a different thing. I just explained to you how I work with weeds. I let them grow up and then chop them down and just let them rot right on the surface and build fertility that way. But grass is a different thing. It forms a turf, right? And quackgrass especially, you know, you chop it up with a hoe. You're transplanting them, you're multiplying, yeah. And so it's really important, you know, for me in design, like is this area, am I gonna allow grass or am I not gonna allow grass? Okay, and then something, I think in a later slide we'll get into, that then now we gotta design our edges. Because grass, if my garden's here, and I don't want grass, but then right on the other side of the fence is grass, that grass always wants to be creeping and moving into that garden, right? So now we need to design an edge to slow that grass, or keep it from moving into the garden. Okay, and then I have, you know, I call them orchards, but they're diverse kind of permaculture orchards, I guess you could say. And I allow grass, right? And then I take my side and I mow the grass, okay? And I don't mind that it's kind of spread. You know, I do a little bit of weeding away from my fruit trees and other trees, but that area is grass allowed. You know, that's kind of what it is, the understory of the orchard, right? And then I have food forest areas that I call. And so for me, you know, this is just kind of how I think about it. And for me, my food forest areas are no grass allowed. Okay, that's kind of the difference for me between an orchard and a food forest. Is for me in my food forest, like it's you know, I have like a fruit tree, let's say, and then I have lots of shrubs underneath them, and then I'm, you know, cultivating the ground cover even down lower, right? And so I'm cultivating all these plants, you know, overstory, mid-story, understory, okay? And I don't want grass coming into that system because it's very, you know, it's complex and it's intentional for all these plants, a lot of these plants to be here. I love volunteers too and whatnot. But I don't want grass in that system. That might be different for you in your food forest, or, but I'm just kind of sharing that, you know, because I'm always thinking about designing, am I gonna allow grass or am I not? You know, if I am allowing grass, then it's more of a mow kind of scenario, like out in the orchard, right? Which, annual garden, you know, we're pretty much never want grass. It's pretty safe to say. Chop and drop, we talked about that. Changing your soil seed bank. This is a really fun one. You know, as you evolve in your gardening journey, you start to selectively let things go to seed. You know, maybe you love wild lettuce, and you know, I love wild lettuce. It hoes down really nice to build fertility. It has medicinal properties. It's just a nice deal. You know, I just like having it around. There's lots of other weeds like that. So I don't mind letting some of those go to seed. And you know what else I like to let go to seed? Regular lettuce, heads of lettuce, you know. Overwintered kale, I'll let go to seed. Cilantro is a great
all
one.
over like the ground cover.
I let Dale go wild.
Yeah. right? So we're starting to change the seed bank that's in our garden soil over to things we want. You know, and then maybe when we do direct seed those rows of beets and there's some patches of bad germination, well, maybe some dill will pop up there. And, you know, we have a useful plant instead of something that maybe wasn't as useful. So that's, and when you start changing, you know, you start really like seeing all the plants that have germinated and changing your soil seed bank, you can really start to move towards what I would call like a closed canopy garden, right? Where there's just like, you can't even see the soil or the mulch, right? Because it's just plants everywhere, and they're all plants that you want and you know how to work with, and yeah. Skeeter's garden, Michael Pilarski, a permaculturist who lived in Montana for a bit, he's out in Washington now, his gardens are incredible, you know, you see just totally closed canopy, like, you know, no empty space, and full of all different kinds of annuals, perennials, biennials, you know, but it's that closed canopy, it's really amazing. Yeah. Okay, integrating perennials. So, you know, let's go back to the whiteboard for a second here. Picture of our son eating black currants last summer there. So, let's say we have a garden, okay? And maybe this is our entrance, a nice arbor. The low-hanging fruit, okay, and integrating perennials into the garden. What do you guys think? Like, where would you start? This is our fence, let's say. Where would you start putting perennials in? Exactly. Borders, edges, right? So that's kind of the low-hanging fruit, the easy place to start. You know, you start just kind of developing perennials along your edges. Really simple design concept. Now you can also, like, you start walking through these gardens out here and you see, you know, really well-designed hedgerows on all, you know, curves and shapes and really neat things like that. But you know, the easy place to start is just kind of on your already established edges, which for most of us is going to be like a garden fence, right? And then you start developing perennials along your edges. And let's say, okay, we're looking south that way. You know, maybe you do some fruit trees towards the north, you know? And then in the front, where you want, okay, in the summer, the sun's up overhead, right? Really high in the sky. But then in the fall, when we're ripening a lot of our tomatoes and things, right? And we want them to be getting sun to ripen up, that sun is getting a lot lower in the horizon to the south, right? So if we had fruit trees in the south side of our garden, okay, well, it's not an issue in the summer as far as casting shade. You gotta think about that ripening time in September, you know, when you still want things to be getting full sun. Okay, so maybe on our southern border, we do like, you know, rhubarb, hyssop, right? Things that are kind of lower growing and aren't going to cast the shade. Yeah, so that's, when we start integrating perennials into the garden, it can kind of give framework, right, to the garden. And now let's say, you know, I have all these perennials established. Now another benefit, right, is it's going to slow that grass, where it's going to give us an edge to maintain where we're, you know, maybe we're putting mulch down and we're slowing that grass from coming, and it gives us a reason to be weeding, because we're weeding under our fruit trees and keeping that grass from coming in. And let's say I, you know, have a family emergency and leave for the whole growing season and can't tend my garden at all. Okay, these perennials, they're going to hold the space for me, right? They're going to slow that creep of grass. They're going to just keep shape to the garden, right? While I have to go tend to an emergency or whatever it is. And you could come back 1 year, even several years later, and you still kind of have a garden, right? And those perennials are kind of holding the space for you. It stabilizes the ecosystem in a way, right? Because annuals, you know, they produce seed. They're perennial in nature that they produce seed and want to come back, but it's not a guarantee of what, you know, is going to germinate that year or have a good year. where perennials, are much more likely to come back strong and kind of provide flowers, pollen for the bees, right? Food for the pollinators. They're gonna provide leaf litter to feed the soil. They're gonna provide shade. They're gonna provide branches for birds to land on, right? They're stabilizing the ecosystem, integrating perennials into our garden, and create and hold edges. So we already talked about that. Yeah. Okay, harvesting. So time plantings and varietal selection for staggered harvest. This is a really important one, or an easy example is apples. Okay, apples, they start ripening. Anyone know the first apple to ripen? The first variety of apple to ripen? It's called yellow transparent. Anyone ever had a yellow transparent? They're well represented in the original homestead plantings around Montana. The common duo was a yellow transparent and a Macintosh. Yellow transparent starts to ripen maybe early August in a really warm year, mid-August or so. So it's the first apple to ripen, okay? And then you go all the way to the later end of the ripening window, okay? Like Northern Spy, Ashmead's Kernel. I've seen people try to plant like Fuji's, but I think they ripen too late for around here. But we're talking end of October harvest, maybe even early November, which temperatures can get too cold and you might not even get that harvest. But so we have this wide window, right, of the first apple to ripen and then the last ones, and then varieties that ripen all the way up in between. Okay, so in our design, I see a lot of people, they'll just get, 3 apple trees that all ripen at the same time. But we can design to have apples, right, from August to September to October through, and then a lot of those late ones are actually storage apples that store right through, weed apples out of the root cellar into June. And they're still, some of them are still really good into June. So you can have this long harvest, this long eating window, and that's part of design. And you can even do this, I've started doing this on a different scale with like lettuce. Lettuce, let's say it's 50 days to a mature head, but then another variety's 40 days and another variety's 60 days. Okay, well what if I kind of do a mix of all 3 of those seeds, plant that out, now you have a longer harvest window for lettuce with just one planting. Okay, so that could be part of your design, is mixing different varieties and staggered harvests. So, shifting the diet closer to home. This was, Makai and I, we lived in where I'm from, upstate New York for a couple of years, and we were kind of, it's like, we wanted to eat our own food that we were growing. We're trying to learn, like, how do we grow our own food? What do we grow to eat our own food, right? And we were really fortunate. There was this big regional market, right, pretty close to where we lived, and it went right through the winter too. And so every Saturday, even though we had a big garden, we'd go down to this regional market, and we had the little organic farms and stands we'd go to, and it was just the best way to really learn like what to grow in the spring, what grows in the summer, and then the really important one is the fall, right? Okay, what's for sale in the fall here, and then going into winter we could see like, oh, they still have cabbages, they still have carrots, they're still bringing beets, potatoes. These are the storage crops that we can grow in these northern climates, right? And so that it's a really great way to learn. If you're trying to, if one of your goals is to shift your diet to, growing your own food or just eating locally, the farmer's market is kind of where you learn, and you can. What's great too is you can ask the farmer a lot of time, about like, oh, what kind of beets are these you're growing, or what kind of potatoes, what does well around here. So shifting the diet closer to home, and that's been a journey. and that's certainly a rewarding one. And the key is storage. You know, we live in a storage climate. That's my last point there. Storage climate skills, right? You know, the growing seasons, it's pretty short. We're pretty far north. And so there's, you know, we could do a whole class on storage, right? And, but those skills are really important, and infrastructure too, right? Like one of the first projects on our property was building a root cellar, and it's just been a total game changer. You know, it's like going down to our own grocery store in the winter. We go down there and get apples, potatoes, leeks. You know, it's really nice, but you don't need a root cellar. You know, it's just kind of understanding what temperatures different things store at. Just an extra refrigerator you can stuff full of a lot of, you know, you can go to the farmer's market and load up and stuff an extra refrigerator full. That's always a good starting point. You know, there's pits in the ground is a really simple way. Also just leaving things right in the garden. Our neighbor, he leaves carrots, beets, potatoes, things like that in the garden all winter. Parsnips are a great one. They'll hang out all winter. And the key, I should say, you know, the weather is a factor. And for our neighbor, he puts a sheet of plastic and then a bit of mulch on top, and that keeps the ground from freezing in the winter. And then he'll pull back the mulch and the sheet of plastic and harvest carrots and things throughout the winter.
Is there a problem with mice or rodents?
No, that's a really good point, because that's
I
a
found
big
that
risk.
put down hardwood or cloth and some sort of chicken fence, you know, a close knit chicken fencing wire to keep them from eating more than the very top of the plant.
Yeah, totally. So that's going to be a risk, you know, if you're storing your crop in the garden opposed to, you know, in a safe refrigerator, root cellar, or garage. You know, rodents would definitely be one of the risks there.
We have a lot of good luck putting our root vegetables in clean peat moss. I've tried sand, but it's a pain in the neck to wash off. The peat moss works really well.
Do you moisten it or keep it pretty dry?
What we do is we'll line the cardboard box with a food grade plastic bag, large one, and then we'll put a layer of peat moss, a layer of carrots, layer of peat moss, layer of carrots, and then we don't wash the carrots, but we cut the tops of them off, because if you don't, they'll try to grow. And then you have to leave some air or the whole thing will turn to mush. So you kind of fold it up like you're closing up the plastic over it, but you leave it so that it's partially open so it can, you know, there's some sort of air exchange and it can outgas the excess moisture.
You keep it in a cool place.
What's that?
A cool place.
And put it in a cool place.
Indoors.
It's inside.
Right now, the last couple of years, we've been doing it in our walk-in cooler, and our carrots will last for 2 years.
Wow.
The part of that is the kind of carrot we grow, which is a really good storage carrot from Johnny Seeds called Bolero, and it's a great big carrot, and it keeps a sweet flavor to it. Let's see. You just need to have it somewhere where it's supposed to be.
Yeah, that's what you know, is the demise of a lot of our things we're trying to store, is the freeze thaw, right? That's where usually even just one of those, freeze and then thaw, you'll start to lose carrots or things like that. So it's trying to provide a stable temperature for these storage foods, you know, where it's not freezing, it's not getting too warm, but it's stable. Okay, so designing integrative living spaces. So, you know, the garden, I just think about what you were talking about, Brad, you know, trained as an arborist, you know, you're trained to like look at the tree, right, and diagnose the tree but now, you know, you've learned like, oh, there's more than just this tree, right? There's the whole ecosystem really that we're looking at. And so, you know, when we're designing our garden, right, we don't want to just design the garden, right? We're designing our whole living space, right? Our gardens, you know, what's the proximity to our kitchen? What's the proximity to from kitchen to compost pile? What's the, you know, how am I going to move from this to that? And oh, where do I like to sit and have my morning tea and listen to the birds? Oh, can I plant something I like there, right? It's all integrated, and we're thoughtfully observing and interacting and adapting and designing our space, you know. And I'll just say again, I know I've kind of already said this, design, it's not just sitting down at a table and designing your garden, right? It's being out in the garden, designing in the space, in time and space, and you know, in the future, I'd like this over here, I'm starting to sense, and you start working towards that, right? And so there was this college campus. I don't know what college it was. I just heard this story one time. I don't know where I heard it, and it's really, really good. Makes a good point. So they built this new college campus, right? And they had all these. If you've ever been on a campus, you got the science building over here and the arts building over here, and right, all these different buildings and dorms over here. And so they built all these buildings, and then they had to build the sidewalks and the paths to connect all the buildings and the dorms and the cafeteria and all these things. And instead of just like, you know, okay, you know, build a sidewalk, connect this building to that one, this one to this one, what they did is they didn't install any of that. They started classes and they let the kids just trample, you know, out whatever pathway, and then over time they started to see the pattern. Okay, this one is really the grass is really well trampled, so this is a major footpath. Oh, look at this little side footpath, you know, path that got a little bit of trampled, so people definitely use it. We need to build something there, you know, and they built all their, you know, sidewalks and things like that. And I think that's really interesting. You know, a lot of time, like I've been on college campuses, and I mean, I went to college a lifetime ago, it seems like, but, you know, there's always like little shortcuts through like the landscaping and like where they didn't build, and so I just thought that was genius, right? You let the action happen, and then you learn from that. And so I just think there's something to learn there. You know, you might, when you sit down to like design your space, you might not know exactly, you know, what the paths are going to be, where everything's going to go, but you start interacting and working and living there and turning on that thoughtful observation, and you know, you can see kind of how the space comes together instead of just trying to, you know, force it and like a sit down at the table design. You know, you can kind of let life happen and learn from that. I thought that was
There's a concept that I think people might appreciate, and it's called, when you have something like chickens or goats, and it's creating a moat garden. And what you do is around your perimeter fence, you create a fence inside of that, and then your chickens will go all the way around. They'll keep the exterior clean from the invasive weeds and species that might be trying to come in. And it's very easy to do. It's something I wish I had done earlier. But it just occurred to me to share that.
Yeah, I've seen some of that, and we've actually had just by chance, you know, I didn't plan on this, I didn't design this, but you know, I was dumping mulch along the fence line just to try to keep grass from coming in, just slow it down. When really, actually, a good strategy, if you have grass coming into the garden, and you don't have like a nice perennial hedgerow there yet or anything like that, to dig a trench, and then, you know, as grass moves, you know, and if it hits a trench, the roots will kind of air prune. So that's a good strategy, you know, until you get beautiful diverse hedgerows up and established, you know, you kind of just, like outside the fence, you know, you just dig a trench, right, and it'll air prune weeds and grasses as they try to come in. And, but one interesting thing that we had on our property is I was dumping mulch up along the fence line to slow the grasses and things. I just, you know, I didn't have time to dig a trench or, whatever it was. And our chickens, after a while, they started going to that mulch and scratching, you know, because naturally under mulch, right, the worms are going to start to come in, the life's going to start to come in, it's going to get softer and stay moist, and so the chickens are attracted to that. And so by dumping mulch around the outside of our fence, I have the chickens scratching and kind of maintaining all the edges. And I didn't design for that, it was just kind of something that happens, and so now I'm continuing to do it and using the chickens to manage our fence lines. It's kind of interesting one. Multifunctional spaces. So this is a good thing to think about, you know, when you're thinking, like, let's talk about a greenhouse for a second. You know, as a most people just think, oh, that's where I'm gonna grow my plants, but what else can a greenhouse do?
Good place for worms, a worm composting system.
Worms like the heat, they like it a little warmer.
Keep chickens in the winter time?
Keep the chickens more active, which will give you more eggs in the winter. Absolutely. Yeah, what else?
Storage.
Keeps the rain off it, keeps the
Yeah.
rust from coming in.
Yeah.
Yeah, greenhouse can be storage.
Cure your onions.
Cure your onions, right? Dry your crop, right? Cure your squash, right? It's, place to sit and have a cup of tea, right? So almost all our spaces, you know, even just a shed, right? It's a tool shed, but a certain time of the year, you know, I need to dry all my Tulsi, and so it's a tool shed, but it's also a drying space. You know, all our spaces, right? Can we think about them? You know, can they be multifunctional? Because as you know, through the gardening season, there's kind of like different needs at different times, right? In the spring, we need lots of space for, you know, maybe seed starting, and then in the fall, we need lots of space for drying and curing, right? And so there's kind of different things needed at different times. So can our spaces, you know, serve those functions and be able to adapt at different times? And you know, so this can be as simple as like, you know, maybe in your workshop, you know, you have this big work table where you do all your, you know, woodworking and different things, but it's on wheels. And you can just slide it out of the way, and that'll make room for the little kids to bowl. You know, it's a kid's play space, right? Just designing and thinking about spaces in ways where they can be multifunctional. And that's really, I think for me, it's at the heart of permaculture. It's kind of like, okay, you know, we have all these systems on our little property. We're on 3 acres down in Hot Springs, and we have all these systems, right? We have goats, we have chickens, we have garden, we have a homestead garden, a market garden. I mean, it's kind of all one, but you know, we're growing our own food and we're growing food for market. We have 2 greenhouses. We have kind of a food forest area. We have a tree nursery where we graft and sell trees. Then we have orchards, right? And how many beneficial connections can we make between all these things, right? Rather than just that isolated, just looking at goats. Okay, you know, this is how the goats work, and this is, you know, it's like, oh, you know, can these prunings I just took off the fruit trees, oh, the goats like to eat those. Oh, you know, a little goat manure back under the tree likes that. Oh, the apples, the goats love that, so do the chickens. Oh, the chickens love the bugs that are kind of coming in from the fruit being on the property. you know, another beneficial connection, the extra garden scraps going to the chickens, right? How many beneficial connections can we establish? You know, oh, this hedgerow is overgrown, I need to prune this hedgerow, okay, firewood, bam. What do I do with the ash? Back under the trees, right? How many beneficial connections can we establish in our spaces and in our lives? And yeah, that's kind of the end of my presentation, I think, and I think that's a good thing to end with, because it's really at the heart of it for me, is those beneficial connections, not just, you know, with each other, with people too, right? Like establishing spaces and connections, and I don't know, that's kind of what it's all about for me. So yeah, I think that's the end for me. Flathead Permaculture is kind of our business for off the farm. If anyone's ever interested in a consultation or
Do you have any beach trees?
I'm working on peach trees right now. I've been